Welcome to another episode of the Battlefields and Bourbon podcast, the podcast where we sit and sip, talk all things Civil War history and bourbon and whiskey. I'm Jack, joined as always by my co-host Elijah. Today we're coming to you from the historic Bell House in beautiful downtown Winchester, Virginia. The Bell House is preserved and maintained by the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation, managing entity of the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields National Historic District, and the official sponsor of the Battlefields and Bourbon podcast. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast, consider becoming a member of the Battlefields Foundation. Every dollar you give to support battlefield preservation here in the Shenandoah Valley, in turn, helps supports the Battlefield and Bourbon podcast. You can become a member by going to www.shenandoahatwar.org. That's shenandoahatwar.org. Click on ways to give, and membership start as low as $35. And like I say, go till you can't give no more. So, like I said, if you like what you hear, go ahead and become a member. Elijah.
Jack.
2025.
First one.
Little
delayed, but here we are.
So, thank you all for listening to our Christmas episode. That is now number 2 of our most listened. I checked the views before. Yeah.
Wow.
Surprise. So, huge thank you to History Fix that helped sponsor that episode, as well as Civil War Digital Digest and Will Eichler over there that helped put that episode out there. Go ahead and give that episode a listen. In the room, before we get started with our bourbon, we also have Cindy Pure. She, if you remember her, she came on during the St. Albans raid episode. So go ahead and give that one a listen and then come back and listen to this one if you haven't. We also have Graham Osborne in the room too. Graham's with the Brice's Crossroads Foundation, and we'll talk a lot more about that throughout the rest of the episode. But as we've introduced everybody here, Elijah, tell us what we're sipping on today.
So Cindy kindly brought us another bottle to sample here on the episode. It is James Pepper's Barrel Proof Bourbon. They just recently came out with this one within the past couple of years, I want to say. The decanter itself models their 1940s glass decanters that they had. This one is 53.2% alcohol by volume. So if you're doing quick math there, 106.4 proof, just double that. This one I have not tried because you can't get it in Virginia. Cindy kindly brought it to us by way of Kentucky from the distillery there in Lexington. So we're going to give this one a little sip. You can pour what you want there. But this one, just based off what I've been able to research on it, is not much. There's no age statement. There is no mash bill for this whiskey. So it's pretty mysterious, but we'll probably be able to pick some things out of it as we go along. But on the website, they say that their whiskeys are aged for an average of 5.5 years. So I don't know if this being a special edition follows that same standard, or if it's a unique one altogether. But it is a dark color, so it should have a little bit of age to it.
Get anything off the nose?
Heavy with the corn, so probably higher corn content than probably a lower rye mash bill, if I had to guess. For a barrel proof, it is lower. You will notice at 106. It's not like your standard barrel proofs like Stag, Elijah Craig barrel proof, where those are up in the 120s, 130 range. This one is on the lower end, but it does have a nice oakier profile to it, obviously because it's barrel proof, straight out of the barrel. I enjoy it. I think it's got a nice sweetness to it, but it's also got those tones of oak, caramel, the dark chocolate, kind of like a toffee flavor to it, and then those leather notes and that sort of thing underneath.
Cindy, did you get all that?
I got all that.
Take notes, write it down.
Yeah.
It was the easiest one for me to drink, so.
Yeah. Really? That's probably that was higher proof than any of the two from from Vermont. But
Graham, what are your thoughts?
You know, I'm glad you said toffee because it was something I couldn't quite place.
Yeah.
And when you said the proof, my eyebrows kind of went up. I thought, oh, this is going to be a little stiff, but it's
scorcher.
Yeah, but it's good. It's good. So I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, it's really smooth for 106. Yeah. I mean, that's really, really smooth, and it's really, really sweet.
Yeah.
I mean, you just taste sugar, I feel like.
Yeah, so, no, it's got a good mix altogether. I enjoy it. I think it's really good, and I think it's what was it? The distillery? I think they said on their card it's like
James Pepper.
Yeah. It's like $60-some odd for a bottle. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a really good buy at that price for what it is and the decanter that it comes in.
70.
Okay, I was off by a little bit.
Yeah.
That would make a really good mint julep.
Yeah.
That would.
No, that one's pretty versatile.
It's syrupy and it's kind of thick, so there's some age on there.
Yeah, and it brings in that smokiness too. So some people like to smoke their cocktails, but that one I think kind of handles that beforehand. But very good overall product from James Pepper. They've got a few different things. You'll notice like their Pepper 1776 bourbon and rye. That's on the ABC shelves here in Virginia. But this one,
Why can't you get this in Virginia?
I think it's like a special release type of thing, but Virginia ABC is very restrictive as far as what they will carry from distilleries and that sort of thing. Like we still don't have quite a few different brands that ought to be here. New Riff, Jep the Creed, stuff like that other states get freely and easily. But
yeah, do they just sell liquor in gas stations in Mississippi?
No,
Okay.
no, it's not that.
That's not an insult to you. Like if you go to Pennsylvania, there's always like a liquor store right next to the gas station. So
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and so I remember the beer I felt like Pennsylvania had the most restrictive ones ever until I started moving around, but now it's a little different.
Virginia's got a lot of, I don't know. In my opinion, when you go into an ABC store, it's like you get what you get that's there, and it's like it's pretty cut and dry.
Yeah.
But as you move regionally throughout the state, there for some reason, like I went to the Harrisonburg, Virginia ABC store before Christmas, and like the variety of Virginia-made stuff they had there was a lot more than what's around the area we're in here in Winchester. So I don't know. Alcohol's weird.
yeah,
I tried to find a Mississippi bourbon, but apparently they don't make it in Mississippi.
Doesn't exist. No.
Moonshine. I could have gotten
Yeah.
moonshine.
There's some gin down there.
maybe like 2 distilleries that make bourbon in Mississippi, which is
Really?
amazing. I
I
would have
didn't
thought
even know
there'd be
that one.
a couple more, given like the moonshining history and stuff. Somebody would have branched into the bourbon world, but it's very few, if any.
Yeah.
One day.
One day.
One day.
Maybe. Everyone's getting on board now. So, well, Graham, we have to mention, too, this is our second Mississippi-related topic. Well, kind of third related topic with Mike Gianfrida that came on twice before. He is also a graduate of the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss. You are as well.
Yes, I know Mike. Mike's a great guy, and I'm loving these highways to Mississippi that we're building here from the valley.
I like it too. Part of my roots land there, so this is exciting for me. Our topic today is going to be Brice's Crossroads, obviously, but tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into Civil War.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, I know. I'm throwing that at you.
What brings you to the table?
Yeah, what brings you, and then what's your involvement with the foundation? What's the
Sure.
foundation? But tell us about yourself first.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So, lifelong Civil War enthusiast. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I started going to the great Eastern battlefields. That was Gettysburg, Antietam, Fredericksburg, Manassas, and I would always come down. I'll never forget that, going to Stonewall Jackson's headquarters here in Winchester. I don't know how many times that I used to go there, so much so that when we would stop there, like I could finish the docent's tour of the place. I was so obsessed with the Civil War, which is a little strange because I have absolutely no ancestral ties to it. My dad is from England, like he's got the accent and everything, and my mom's people didn't get over here till the 1890s. It was just something I caught the Civil War fever. When I was young, I was always into military history. I served in the Marine Corps myself. My grandfather was a Iwo Jima Marine. My other grandfather was an RAF bomber pilot. So military history was always very kind of big in my family. But the difference is that the Civil War is here, right? You can walk these places. And I got really obsessed with going to the battlefields. And my parents really kind of... They fostered that. There was one point when I was 10 or 11 that I think my mom took me to Gettysburg 20 times in a single year, which was like a huge thing. It shows you how obsessed I was, right?
A time out on that. Elijah's never been to Gettysburg.
I know.
Make fun of me for it.
I find that very odd. I wish I would have known, but anyway, so cut to years later. I still kept it up no matter where I went. Like for example, when I was I went to Parris Island for the Marine Corps, and when I graduated, everyone was out and they had all these things they wanted to do. And the first place that I went was Fort Sumter because it was right there. Wow. And so I ended up going to Dartmouth College after the Marine Corps. Studied history. I was my concentration was in 19th century America, as you can imagine. Did a big project for them about the Civil War dead of Dartmouth, where, as you can imagine, it was mostly Union. There was 73 total, 63 Union, but there was 10 Confederates as well. Really got into the project, and that's when I started going from, being an enthusiast about the Civil War, but then starting to really research it. When I moved to Mississippi to go to graduate school, to law school down there at Ole Miss, it was very easy for me to take every weekend to go to Brice's Crossroads, Shiloh, Vicksburg. I love these kind of things. And it was kind of around then I started becoming a Westernist, is where I really started focusing on the Western theater, not only because I was there, but just kind of how it played in the war, and we all have our opinions on it, and they can go back and forth or what they are, but I really do believe that the war was kind of won and lost out there in the West. And so while I'm developing this kind of research and this interest, I'm out there in the West, and so I'm kind of drawn to those battles. So then I worked for the National Park Service for a number of years, and then a couple years back we started the Brice's Crossroads Foundation. So Brice's Crossroads is one of the real success stories in land preservation, especially out in the West. There is a 1 acre postage stamp National Park Service site that's been there since the 1930s. But the Brice's Crossroads National Battlefield Commission, over the last 25 to 30 years, has preserved nearly 2,000 acres out there. However, we came into existence because there hasn't been a long-term interpretive plan. There hadn't been programming out there. They do have a local museum and all that, but there hadn't been a real kind of concentration of Civil War enthusiasts, people that are really passionate about it, thinking about how to bring the battlefield into this kind of next century, get visitation out there and do great programming and tell this story of this really unique, small but unique battle that's out there in the Western theater. And so I've been the president since the start. We launched officially in November of 2022, so we're just a little over 2 years old. We host symposiums. We do, like I said, we do battlefield programming, and now we are finally starting to kind of get around to where we are taking on big battlefield projects, and so it's very, very exciting. Very grassroots. So it's all pretty much Civil War enthusiasts that are kicking in and all that, and so that's where I am right now.
That's awesome. Well, thank you again for coming up, and we'll say that Graham made it a point to try to make this connection. And Cindy, you were out there in those neck of the woods back in November, right?
I was out there in June and November.
She was literally in the woods. She came for our battlefield camp
Yeah.
out, which is a unique experience that we try to offer once a year to our members.
Yeah, so Cindy being on here before and went out there, and it's just this weird connection, small world in the history world, obviously, and you were making your way through the valley, through Virginia, on your way up to Gettysburg, and we just got hit by a massive, well, I wouldn't say massive, but the first significant snowstorm of the year. So we're appreciative that you're here. Yeah. And let's talk about Brice's Crossroads.
Sure. Yeah. So first we kind of have to set the scene of where we're at in 1864. And I know all of you know, and probably most of your listeners know, that certainly the war was not over in 1864. Anything but it. In the valley alone, from April to November, the amount of action that's going on around here is incredible, and the same thing's kind of going on everywhere. I think when you're dealing with Civil War visitors, even people that have a good knowledge or just general history buffs, 1863, Gettysburg happens, Vicksburg happens, and sometimes your mind shuts off and it's just a straight road to Appomattox and that's it. And that's really not the case. 1864 is the year in the Civil War for me, and so I always try to kind of put that in the visitors' minds is that like, hey, the war's not over. Certainly the men fighting it don't know which way it's going to go. And I'm very, very thankful because just recently in the last issue of the Civil War Monitor, William Marvell, I don't know, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. He talks about this rebel revival that happens in the first half of 1864. And this is something that I've been kind of pounding the table on to visitors and within the organization, because if you get over that, there's still a lot at stake that's going to go on. Obviously, Lincoln's election and things that are going on. And he kind of lays it out in his article, and I think he's written a full-length book. Though I read the whole article, but I didn't write the full-length book. So I was really, really glad to see that, because you have all these things kind of going on. And anyways, so 1864, Grant, who has made his name and he's made his fame out in the West. He is now in the East, right? Now he's going to be riding with the Army of Potomac. And he's left in charge, his number one subordinate, which is William Tecumseh Sherman. And he is about to take on this massive, massive campaign in Atlanta. 100,000 men, 3 Union armies, a lot of personalities. everything that's going on out there. And the Atlanta campaign is an absolutely critical campaign to the Civil War. And I'll bring this up later, but sometimes some of these, how we judge what's important to remember in the Civil War is really kind of based on where you can put your boots on the ground today, right? There's plenty of battlefields that are completely overrun. I think Atlanta maybe in some ways doesn't get the credit that it deserves because you can't really go and visit these places and see these great vistas, even though there are places. I don't want to say there aren't, but a lot of Atlanta is paved over, right? So you can't go to these battlefields anymore. There are some, like I said, but what happens at Brice's Crossroads and what happens in North Mississippi is a direct connection part of the Atlanta campaign, right? That's what's happening in 1864. There will be no less than 4 substantial federal expeditions that come out of Memphis to support what's going on in Atlanta on direct orders from Sherman and McPherson, who are in the field there in Atlanta. So Sherman, you can say what you want about his policies. He really did learn to burn in Mississippi. I think Michael talked about on that one of the episodes. He certainly does that in the Meridian campaign, the early part of 1864. And you can talk about his battlefield ability, but what you really can't talk about is his ability to plan and logistics. This is really where he made himself a great general. He sets himself apart. And he is immediately worried about this big campaign that's about to happen in North Georgia, right? Because he's getting all his supplies coming from Nashville, and it's coming on a single track railroad, right? And all those supplies are coming from Louisville. And as he continues to move south into Georgia, as his campaign he plans being successful, that line's only going to get longer. So he's thinking about logistics from the very beginning, and he's worried that there's a Confederate cavalryman out there, Nathan Bedford Forrest, who has the ability and the experience to really jam him up. And if you stall an army of this size, even for a week or two, it's going to be difficult, right? Because you have to look that he's not only talking about feeding this army and clothing this army. He is planning to fight. So he needs ammunition, which means that there's going to be casualties, which means that he's going to need hospital supplies. So he is really thinking about this, all taking it in very, very early. So as early as mid-April, he is already talking to the commander, he's Major General Washburne, Cadwallader Washburne, one of the great names of the Civil War, who is in charge out there in Memphis, and he wants expeditions to go out to find, fix in place if they can, make Forrest come to him, and if they can, destroy Nathan Bedford Forrest out there in North Mississippi, West Tennessee. So the guy that they have in mind is Samuel Sturgis. Samuel Sturgis is a interesting character. Samuel Sturgis is from that much celebrated 1846 class at West Point, which has McClellan, has Stonewall Jackson, has Pickett, has several names. You can just look at the list. Even the casual Civil War person will know probably half a dozen of them. He's part of that class. He serves in Mexico. He serves out west versus the American Indians. He does very, very well prior to the Civil War. Something happens, though, to him at the outbreak of the Civil War. Don't know what it is. There hasn't been a deep dive into what's going on. But he changed, his ability changes. Maybe what happens is that he's given too much responsibility and expectations considering his education and his rank within the regular army. But he doesn't do as well as they think he's going to do, probably that he thinks he's going to do. And sometimes you'll see some historians that say, Samuel Sturgis, he had this great Civil War record up until Brice's Crossroads. And that's really only surface level if you're looking where he's at, because you just assume that he's doing well. But if you tear that back, what ends up happening at Brice's Crossroads, which is one of the few Confederate victories of note in the Western theater, you can already see that there's a problem brewing with Sturgis. Sturgis is at Wilson's Creek, Missouri, out there in the Trans-Mississippi Theater in 1861. He takes command when Nathaniel Lyon, who is in charge of the federal forces out there, he's killed. A lot of the men, and this happens a lot of the men that are fighting there, the Union men at Wilson's Creek, believe that the battle could have gone a very different way if Sturgis would have kind of dug his heels in and things would end up different. And these men will remember that forever. In fact, there are Iowans that fight at Brice's Crossroads that know Sturgis. They're wary that he's taking command, right? So if you see someone say that, like, oh, well, Sturgis was, capable before Brice's Crossroads, well, the writing's kind of on the wall that it might not have been. After Wilson's Creek, he is sent back east, and he takes part in a lot of the big battles. One of maybe one of his first kind of things that sets him on a bad path is that he is unimpressed with the railroad system and coming out of Washington to support the other Union armies. And so he commandeers several railroad cars and all this, and he holds them for himself. But he does this during a critical time when Pope is looking for reinforcements during Second Manassas, Second Bull Run. And he's quoted as saying over and over again when someone says, hey, we need these cars to reinforce Pope, he says, I don't care one pinch of owl dung for Pope. And he keeps saying this to people. And finally, someone says, hey, it's not Pope that's saying this. Halleck needs this. He goes, well, I respect Halleck, so I'll follow these orders. So anyways, this keeps going on. And it kind of gets brushed under the rug because he takes responsibility. He's like, I was kind of in the wrong. I should have let those go. He's at Antietam. But then at Fredericksburg, he has a division at Fredericksburg. So he's around. And he's a brigadier general at this point, right? And there are claims that at Fredericksburg he is very aloof. He's detached. He's not really doing his job. Very possible that he was, in his cups. He was drinking quite a bit, and the evidence supports that because at this point in the war he's had that exposure to all that. Now he was a friend of McClellan, and there was some political stuff that would go on that would kind of keep him down. But remember, Fredericksburg is post-McClellan, so he had an opportunity to kind of show his stuff, show his grit. And he's still a brigadier general at that point. He's not giving really great responsibilities. So he goes out west finally in 1863. He does do some good work as a cavalry commander in East Tennessee. And now Sherman is pretty sure that Sturgis is going to be able to take care of this operation of keeping Forrest busy and even destroying him in North Mississippi if he can do that. So anyways, that's Samuel Sturgis to begin with. And then what you have is very early in May, late April, you have this first expedition go out. 6,000 men, combined infantry and cavalry force. They come out of Memphis, Tennessee. They go in to North Mississippi to a little town called Ripley, Mississippi. They make it all there, and they decide, well, we got to turn back. So why do they got to turn back? Well, North Mississippi had been touched by war for almost 2 consecutive years at that point. There is nothing for soldiers or horses to forage. There's nothing left there. The civilian populace that was there got good at hiding food for themselves. The Confederates weren't even able to really respond. North Mississippi has really been drained by this point in 1864. So all the supplies that they're bringing out, the expedition needs to turn around. There's some minor kind of contact with Confederate forces. But the mission isn't completed. All right, the mission isn't completed, and Sturgis kind of very, very. It's a strange message he sends to Sherman because Sherman is worried that Forrest is going to hit his line. Sherman has now started. This is May 9th, May 10th. He's now started his Atlanta campaign, his push.
Where is he starting from?
He's starting from the Dalton area, and I think like the first shots will be like the Rocky Face Ridge and that kind of area. That's real up there in North Georgia, right? So this has already started at this point. Yeah. And so Sturgis will send him a message that says, I'm sorry I can't bring you Forrest's hair. He's too great of a plunderer. Like he would never face me, man to man or anything on fair terms. But like, oh, by the way, like he's definitely going to hit your supply lines. Sorry about that. And so Sherman reads it, says, well, no, like the story isn't over. Like get back out there and go again. And so that's what leads us to the next expedition, which becomes Brice's Crossroads. On this expedition, it's even bigger. 8,500 men. You have a division of cavalry, which is led by the much celebrated cavalryman Benjamin Grierson of the horse soldiers fame. He does the great feint, I guess you could say, raid during the Vicksburg campaign that draws Pemberton away from it. So he's got some success. He's been in the saddle in North Mississippi for a long time and knows what's going on. So he's got a very capable, on paper, commander in Benjamin Grierson. He's got an infantry division with 3 brigades. So you got 2 brigades of cavalry, 3 brigades of infantry, and he's moving down, and he's about to move into North Mississippi. So that's kind of the stage that's set there at the end of May of 1864. On the Confederate side, you have, of course, Nathan Bedford Forrest. Nathan Bedford Forrest has a cavalry corps out there operating in West Tennessee, North Mississippi. At this point, he has multiple divisions. He is actually under the command of Major General Stephen D. Lee, who is head of the department, right, which is the Department of Alabama, Mississippi, and in East Louisiana. Two very different guys. Forrest, of course, the big story is he's got no military experience prior to the war. He's risen from lieutenant colonel very quickly to, at this point, he's a major general. He does not get along with all of his superiors, but he has done well enough in the field, and I don't want to make small, because he has done some really great things, that he has still kind of got the respect of a lot of the people in the Western theater, even though he's had these run-ins with people like Van Dorn and Bragg and all these kind of things. So he's out there, and now he kind of has this quasi-independent command. So he's out there. He's done successful recruiting, kind of filling his ranks and all this, and wouldn't you know it, on June 1st, he sets out from Tupelo, Mississippi, to do exactly what Sherman is afraid he's going to do. He has 2,000 hand-picked men that he's going to go, and he's going to go find a way to somewhere to really disrupt what's going on with Sherman. So he goes out there, makes it to Alabama. By June 3rd, he's getting urgent messages from Stephen D. Lee saying, you must turn around. You must turn around right now, because we hear this other expedition is coming out of Memphis. So why would it be important? Because you'd think, in retrospect, that they should have just let Forrest go and have it, right? You know, what's there to protect? But there's an area in North Mississippi, well, actually really coming down to central Mississippi, it's called the Blackland Prairie area. Really one of the, at this point, there's many breadbaskets of the Confederacy. This is one of them. A lot of the supplies that Johnston's army is getting is coming from this Blackland Prairie region. They had finally got the railroad that went from Mobile, Alabama, to the Ohio River in Kentucky, kind of up and working all the way to Corinth, Mississippi, which is a majorly important city in the early part of the war, especially in 1862. And they didn't want this federal expedition to kind of disrupt that and cause havoc on that, because that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to still supply Johnston and all this in Atlanta. And so they calls him back on June 3rd, comes back into to Tupelo. And then that's when you start seeing these maneuvers going on, like what's going to happen, you know. And Brice's Crossroads was what's called a classic meeting engagement, right? It's not, it's where it's kind of unexpected. But let me kind of lay it out a little bit what's going on. So as those days are going on, coming southeast out of Memphis, the expedition under Sturgis is kind of slowly making its way. And wouldn't you know it, this, like I said, this expedition is a lot bigger. Has 20 to 24 pieces of artillery. They're not fooling around with this one. They really want something to happen here, right? But by the time they get to Ripley, Mississippi again, which is in orientation, it's north of Tupelo, it's north of Brice's Crossroads, about 20 miles or so. They have a meeting. They have a council of war, so to speak, and they talk about going back, because once again they're completely depleted of supplies, or they think they're going to be, and they're worried about getting deeper into Mississippi. And if they do get attacked, it's going to be a total disaster. So Grierson, who is the cavalryman who has been in North Mississippi all throughout the war, pretty much, says, yeah, we got to turn back, because if we get caught out, you know, pretty much with our pants down here, we are going to get spanked. And you know, I'm not sure that we could protect anything. Like it would be a rout. Sturgis agrees with that, but McMillan, who's the colonel, he's the senior colonel, and so he's the division commander of the infantry, says, you know, we just got chastised because we came out here 2 weeks ago and then we turned around, and now we're talking about doing this again. Like we need to bring out Forrest and meet him in the field at some point before we can turn around. And Sturgis says, yeah, you know, he's a U.S. Army regular. He knows that like his career could be on the line at this point if he fails to kind of follow the spirit of the orders of what Sherman's looking for, which is to occupy Forrest's time, and if he can, destroy him, right? He doesn't want another message saying, like, sorry, Forrest is heading your way. Like, you got to do something about it.
I'm sure there's probably a point of pride there, too, being a regular and trying to face off and gain some sort of victory over Forrest, who is not a military man. They don't want to look cowardly in front of him.
Absolutely. Forrest is this... Sherman knew Forrest pretty well at this point, right? And Sherman is definitely one of those people that's from the West Point community. That's why he's giving Sturgis a lot of these chances. He's another West Point boy. This is one of his guys, And I think there is some like that. This rabble, these kind of, especially these Western men, right? They can't overtake us, right? So yeah, no, that's definitely a good point. And so they continue on, but at that point they do send some of their kind of sicker soldiers back, lamer soldiers back. They had 250 wagons. They send 50 of those wagons back. So they're still going on, about 8,000 men heading down south easternly into Mississippi. And so at this point, Forrest and Lee don't really know what this column's going to do. They're worried that they're going to attack that railroad, the Mobile, Ohio Railroad, which is what brought all this fighting into Mississippi really originally. And they don't know if this is a major column that's going to go reinforce Sherman in Atlanta. Some say all the Atlanta thing is directly tied to this. And so they're kind of waiting and seeing. And so so Forrest is kind of spread out by the night before Brice's Crossroads. He's got men as far as, probably about 25 miles away, right? So let me kind of break down what Forrest's forces look like on the eve of battle, okay? He's only got 8 pieces of artillery, and they're led by Captain John Morton. John Morton is only 21 years old. He is in charge of Forrest's artillery. This guy he's a really, really interesting character. He comes from a pretty well-to-do family. He tries to enlist early in the war. His dad has enough influence that he literally goes into the camp and pulls him out and saying, like, no, like, terminate this enlistment. It's not going to happen. He runs away again, and he joins the artillery, and I guess his dad's like, well, I can't. He's very young at this point. He's 17, 18 years old at this point, and I guess I can't stop it. He goes and he fights at Fort Donelson, and he fights very well as a young artilleryman, and he's noticed for how his fight, and he's captured, and he goes to prison. Early on in the part of that war, there isn't that exchange system, so most of the Fort Donelson prisoners, they spend the full clip in jail, and so that's where he's at. But he remembers at Fort Donelson this brash Confederate cavalryman that says, I did not come here to surrender my command. That's Nathan Bedford Forrest. Forrest refuses to surrender at Donelson, and he runs 600 men or so out in the middle of the night across freezing water to get out. And Morton remembers that. So when he gets released from prison, he goes and he specifically requests to serve under Forrest, right? And he would be a Forrest loyalist to the end. He's only 21 years old, but he's a pretty capable guy at this point. So he's in charge of the artillery. Forrest also has his largest brigade, right? His largest brigade is 2,500 men under Tyree Bell. They're the furthest away on the eve of the Battle of Brice's Crossroads in a little town called Rienzi, which is on that Mobile and Ohio Railroad. If you look at a modern map of Mississippi and you look at the eastern corridor, you'll see Highway 45. That's it runs parallel to where the old Mobile, Ohio was. Rienzi is far north. It's getting very close to Corinth. As you move south, he has 2 brigades, and these are pretty small brigades, right? These are 700 men under Edmund Rucker, and it's 800 men under Highland Line, which is the Kentucky Brigade, right? These Kentuckians are an amazing group. They are 3 of these 4 units started out as regular grunts, regular infantry, right? They had fought at places like Shiloh and Fort Donelson, Baton Rouge, and these guys kind of get lost in the story of the war. If you have any familiarity with the Western theater, one of the most famous brigades out in the Confederate story, at least, is the Kentucky Orphan Brigade, right? Well, these aren't those guys. These are another orphan brigade, and they had done a lot of fighting, And then they have one cavalry unit that had also done a lot of fighting. And so you have these 4 units in Kentucky. And what's really interesting about these guys is that 4 units, only 800 man brigade. So you can see how small, like 800 would have been a nice size regiment at the beginning of the year. This is now the whole brigade. They go into Kentucky in the months before Brice's Crossroads, and they are actually given leave to go to this is the first time they've been back in Kentucky since the start of the war, right? Almost 3 years for most of them. And one of the things that sticks with Forrest is that when he gives these guys leads, he's not exactly sure how many are going to return. And nearly to a man, all of them return to the command. So this is a state that these are guys that are totally committed to the cause, right? These guys are not going home. These guys are going to see it out through the end. And so his Kentuckians will prove very, very vital to him at the Battle of Brice's Crossroads. So that's one of the, so you have 1,500 men there plus the artillery that's in a place called Boonville, which is now moving south. And then he's got these very interesting guys, 500-man brigade from Alabama that are coming across. These are not Forrest traditional troops. They're actually detached from a different department because he knows that a fight might be coming. He meets with Stephen D. Lee the day before the Battle of Brice's Crossroads. Stephen D. Lee is more of kind of he has that traditional military training. He's looking at the writing on the wall, and he wants to draw the Union forces as deep as they can into Mississippi before they strike them and have a battle. Because knowing if they're successful, the retreat, 100, 200 miles, or not 200, but 100, 120 miles back to Memphis will be even more debilitating to the Army if they do that.
Is Lee's command based out of Tupelo?
No. Okay. So it's based out of a place called Meridian. Okay. Meridian at that point had been burned to the ground. But he does move because that track had been kind of rebuilt. He moves pretty frequently between Mobile, Meridian, Tupelo, and then he's even up all the way up in Boonville, which is now getting very close to Corinth, Mississippi on the eve of the battle. And so he tells Forrest that, but he does allow Forrest the discretion, saying, if you find an opportunity to strike, I'll give that to you. And this must have been very, very tough for Stephen D. Lee. Stephen D. Lee's a Charleston West Pointer, right? And Forrest is he's a hard Western man, self-made on cotton plantations and the slave trade, very controversial things, but a very, very wealthy man by the beginning of the Civil War. And Lee has been kind of told that Forrest is going to give you probably some issues, and so Lee's young. Lee's, I think, only 29 years old at this point, and he's got this personality that's underneath him, and so he does give him that discretion that if you see a chance to strike this Union column, please go do it. I'll leave that up to you, but I would prefer, very nicely, sir, if you would bring them down even further. You know what I mean? And that's not that's nothing to dig against Stephen D. Lee. Stephen D. Lee is one of the most fascinating characters on the Confederate side to me during the war. He becomes the youngest lieutenant general at age 30. He starts out. He's in every arm of the military. He's in artillery, cavalry, infantry. He starts out. He's fighting on the peninsula in '62. He's in the very famous photo at Antietam, the artillery men and the bodies strewn on the floor, on the ground, and you can see the Dunkard Church in the background. That's Stephen D. Lee's men. So he's there at Antietam. He gets sent to the Western Theater, and it's not for that culling where Robert E. Lee got rid of some of the maybe problem leaders. I really believe Stephen D. Lee was sent out west because he was a rising star in the Confederacy, and the West was starting to show the cracks really at this point. He goes out there and he fights in one of the other few Confederate victories in the Western Theater, which is Chickasaw Bayou, which I believe you guys talked about not too long ago. So he takes a big part in that. He's at the Siege of Vicksburg. He is almost immediately exchanged because the Confederacy sees his value out in the West. So this guy, I don't want to make light of it that he's a little timid with Nathan Bedford Forrest, but he does give a little deference despite his, hoity-toity background and military education, and this guy was a veteran, So,
what's the age difference between him and Forrest?
13 years at this point.
Forrest is older than him, correct?
Forrest is older than him by 13 years, and a very different man that he's probably used to than dealing with on the battery at Charleston, right?
Probably difficult to talk to, bark orders at somebody older than you. Just feels odd.
Yeah, yeah. And so, and he's established, right? Forrest has established kind of his lore already. A lot of people think that a lot of Forrest stuff, mythology or whatever, mythos or whatever you want to call it, is post-war. But a lot of it is actually going on during the war as well. People know who Forrest is, what he's doing, and all that.
Does Forrest, is he aware of this kind of aura he's developed during the war?
You know what? I don't think that he is in that kind of terms, because he's such his personality. Like, I'm not a Forrest expert, but and there's people out there, and I almost purposely try not to be a Forrest expert, because there are people every year. There's like a book about Forrest that, like, he's this monster, and then there's another book about like how he's the greatest that there ever was, and that if they made him the leader, like things would have gone different in the West. And the reason why is that so much has been, they used to call Robert E. Lee like the Marble Man. Like, he can't even really write about him in a non-biased way, because there's so much mythology behind it. Mm-hmm. And that's very much kind of where Forrest is today, where it's going to evoke very, very deep passions right away. And so when you ask about his personality like that, I don't think he cared. I don't think he cared at all. I don't think that I think he was going to do what he wanted to do, which makes it a very tough person to be under your command. But also, what he's going to do is usually successful. So you kind of let him do it. You know what I mean? And that's where we're at with this dynamic, right? So Stephen D. Lee takes the train back down to a place called Okolona, which is farther south on the Mobile and Ohio Railroad, hoping that we can get enough troops there to congregate and really do damage. But he leaves them alone. And so that's where we're at. And so, again, on the morning of June 10th will be the Battle of Brice's Crossroads, okay? The Union expedition has continued to move south. They're at a place called Stubbs Plantation. Again, Benjamin Grierson, who I don't know exactly. I haven't seen anyone write this, but I assume that he has second overall command of the entire expedition. Like, if something would happen to Sturgis, I assume that he would take over. But I don't know if that's official. I don't know how exactly that works. And I say that because he's a brigadier general at that point. And so Sturgis, but Sturgis has overall command. There's more troops under the infantry division, but the guy's a senior colonel. McMillan is a senior colonel. And that's important because it's a point I'm going to make up when we get into the actual fighting. So Benjamin Grierson again says, we cannot keep going. Like, I recommend that we turn around. And at this point, Sturgis is committed. He says, no, we gotta at least make contact with the enemy, right? So Nathan Bedford Forrest was born in Tennessee, but he grew up in North Mississippi. He knows this area very, very well. People know him down there. As you can imagine, someone that went from, he had a meteoric rise in finances, and so he moved to Memphis and all that. But he's someone at age 16, his father dies. He takes over all the responsibilities of the household. There's a newborn baby at that time, which would be his brother Jeffrey Forrest. He's well known. The Forrests are well known in this area, so he knows everything that's going on right there. When he finds out that the Union expedition continues to move south from Gallipoli, instead of moving directly east toward Corinth, he now knows that they're not going to Corinth to reinforce Johnston in Georgia. He knows that they're going to come down and they're going to strike the Mobile, Ohio at some point, and they might try to go for that Blackland Prairie region. He is ready to fight at this point, and he knows which ways to go to try to cut him off. And so he looks at the road system and he says, we need to get men to this place called Brice's Crossroads before the expedition gets there. So 4 a.m. on June 10th, he has men leaving from Boonville, Mississippi, coming down. Even though Boonville is farther away than Baldwin, where the Alabama Brigade is, there's two things going on. The men that he has at Boonville are men that he has fought with. He's trusted them, and they're already well supplied. The men in Baldwin, this Alabama Brigade, they're only 6 miles away from that crossroads. You would think, send down a message, tell them to get to that crossroads and hold it. That's always something that perplexed me, why we wouldn't do that. I used to kind of dismiss it as like, well, he just didn't know these Alabamians, probably didn't trust them or anything like that. That could have been part of it, but also another part of that is that these guys were not well supplied. They served a more traditional cavalry role as far as like surveillance, of intelligence gathering. That's what they were doing in North Alabama, these guys were. They weren't your traditional dismount fight guys. And so what ends up happening with what's happening with them is that he wants them to wait for the column coming from Boonville to resupply them before they head out towards the Crossroads, even though he wants to get the Crossroads first. So in the morning, June 10th, they start heading out towards the Crossroads. He sends out a scouting party with Lieutenant Black of the 7th Tennessee. They get to the Crossroads first, but it's just a few men to kind of try to make contact with this Union column that's coming down from Stubbs Plantation. They turn the corner, and within a couple miles, they hit the Federal vanguard of the cavalry, and they're kind of chased back out through the Crossroads. They come back down. They let Forrest know, who is now heading towards the Crossroads, we're not going to beat them there, right? We're not going to beat them there. Like, what do you want us to do? So this is kind of very, very typical Forrest. He wants to develop the fight and wants to see what's going on, right? A lot of other ones would say, hey, well, we had a plan. I have orders to go farther south, so let's break off and we'll head south. But Forrest wants to see what's going on, right? And one of the things that I started thinking about when I really started studying this battle 7-8 years ago is that I just told you about, like, Forrest had to take on a lot of responsibilities as the kind of the man of the house, the father. That baby that's born is Jeffrey Forrest. Jeffrey Forrest will serve under him during the Civil War. At the Battle of Okolona in February of 1864, which is another Forrest victory, Jeffrey Forrest is killed. And this affects Forrest greatly at the time. He actually almost leads a quasi-suicidal charge because he's so kind of upset and temperamental about what's going on. But June 10th is also the birthday of Jeffrey Forrest. And so if there's a chance to kill Federals on June 10th, Forrest is going to try to take that chance. And so tactics kind of be damned in a lot of ways. There's maybe some emotion in it. Now, I'm not saying that's the primary reason, certainly not, but I believe that's in the back of his mind. It has to be, because that moment changed his life when he was a 16-year-old boy. And now here he is again on this anniversary, the first birthday of his brother right after he just died. You know what I mean? So all this is going through his head, but he is not going to let the Federals, go away without fighting them. So what ends up happening is the Federal cavalry is now hip to that. Hey, we got some Confederate scouts out there. We need to push through the Crossroads, which is exactly what they do. So their first brigade of cavalry under George Waring goes through the Crossroads. They beat Forrest there, and they push out on the road to where Forrest troops are coming, right? But Forrest has his order of battle set up very, very good that day. Now, it might have been by happenstance, or it might have been on purpose, but the first brigade that he has that is going to face the Federal ones are these Kentuckians, all right? These Kentuckians I told you about, most of them are former grunts. Most of them are very committed to the fight, experienced veterans, a lot of them. Even though they're a small unit, only 800 men, right? Waring's going to have 500 or 600 more men than that just in his brigade, right? So when they first fight, there's some exchanges that go back and forth, but then the Kentuckians develop in a line of battle, and the Federals are expecting to see only Confederate cavalry, which at this point, these Kentuckians, they're mounted. So they're kind of technically they're mounted infantry, but they're technically, mounted. But man, these guys move like infantry. And the Federals are a little surprised to see that. And they say, okay, well, these guys have infantry type weapons. They fight like infantry, and they make a hard push, even though the Confederates are outnumbered quite a bit at this point, right? They make a demonstration to kind of show fight, and this immediately sets the tone for the rest of the day. At this point, the Federal cavalry doesn't exactly know what they're facing. The terrain is awful, and I should also mention that the expedition left Memphis around June 1st. From June 1st to June 9th, torrential rain the entire time. And if you've read any firsthand accounts from generals on that, what it's like marching in the mud, I don't care what any part of the country that was during the Civil War, it's awful. So the Federal expedition is moving very slow. That's why it's taken them so long to get where they're at. And it's miserable, right? And now the Mississippi heat has kicked in, right? And then when you look at the terrain, it is covered by this kind of scrub oak. Its visibility is very low. It's hilly. It's a part of Mississippi, like you said, Jack. You've been to that area before. It's not it's not the Delta, right? It's not that area. It's got some rolling hills and all this. So When these Kentuckians start firing their Enfield rifles and moving into line like an infantry, like they're pretty certain that they're facing a full-on infantry brigade, even though it's not many guys. So one of the things I want to point out in this style of fighting, at Brice's Crossroads, there is no men with sabers drawn fighting on horseback via Brandy Station, right? That does not happen at Brice's Crossroads. This is all dismounted fighting. And so when you dismount, you have to have someone, one out of every 4 or 5 guys be a horse holder, right? So your numbers are even further diminished than what we talk about. So we say 800 guys, you really only have, 600 guys on the line, right? But Forrest does some really good things. And our battlefield program director, he's retired Colonel Jim Garrett, he really put this in my head over the last couple of years about what Forrest is doing, because he's highly outnumbered at this point. If the Union cavalry pushes against this Kentucky brigade, no matter the demonstration they're making, no matter their experience as combat troops, they're going to overwhelm them just by numbers, right? But what this brigade does and what Forrest does is that he fixes the Union in place. So now that freedom of movement and maneuver that the Union could use to really kind of win the day, and all we could be talking about, Brice's Crossroad might be called the skirmish of Baldwin, and it's just a little dot on the Civil War map, just in Mississippi. He doesn't do that, so he fixes the Forrest and the Kentuckians fix that first Union brigade in place. Forrest is always looking for an advantage at this point. So he breaks off 2 companies of the 12th Kentucky Cavalry, which is part of this brigade, and he sends them further south to scout another way around. He's already looking for an advantage, where on the other side, they're already on their heels. They don't know what's really going on. Just that act alone, that 2nd Cavalry Brigade, there's 2 cavalry brigades in the federal division. That 2nd Cavalry Brigade, which should be coming out and maybe leaving a skeleton force to hold that crossroads and move the half a mile east on the road where the fighting's taking place. That movement alone, just that sending this detachment out makes that 2nd Brigade get in line on the right wing of this 1st Federal Cavalry Brigade. So now you have 600 men effectively that are holding over 3,000 men in place, right? Like you have a stagnant Union line right there, and this is allowing Forrest, as his other brigades come up behind him, to now start making the numbers a little bit more even. And every time a brigade will arrive on the field, Forrest will attack. So he keeps showing fight. So when Rucker's men come with 700 men and they line up on the left-hand side of the Kentucky Brigade, they attack, right? They attack right away. And this again is very upsetting to the federal commanders, because they don't know why this Confederate group is taking such an aggressive stance with them, unless they're confident that they have the numbers and they have the know-how and that they're going to overrun them, right? And so you have all this going on. You have low visibility. The Union does have some artillery pieces, but they're not really being able to operate because of the low visibility. So they're just kind of lobbing shells. Also, at this point, the 1st Brigade only has 2 real kind of artillery pieces, and then they have 4 mountain howitzers. Not that a mountain howitzer can't kill you, it certainly can, but those mountain howitzers aren't going to scare off a Kentucky Brigade full of infantrymen that had faced cannon in the face at Shiloh and stuff like that. So they're okay with that, right? So you have all that going on. And so as the brigades start to fall in, now that Alabama Brigade, Johnson's Alabama Brigade, which our Vice President Michael Jack, who you met, he's done, Michael Dempsey, he's done amazing work, because this is a very Confederate cavalry units in the Western Theater in 1864 and onward are probably the hardest units to research in the Civil War, I'm convinced, because there's very little any kind of substance you can sink your teeth into. And so anyways, he's done really great research on these 500 guys that come out here. And this will be the most extensive combat they see for the entire war. And they're going to get to hang their hat for the rest of the war that they were at this Confederate victory out here in Northeast Mississippi. So when they arrive, and so you had Rucker's brigade that lined up on the left of the Kentuckians, Johnson's Alabama lines up on the right. Again, first thing they do is they attack, right? to kind of put the cavalry back on the thing. At this point, Grierson, whose heart really isn't in this fight for the reasons we talked about before, I think he already wanted to turn around on 2 occasions, right? And now he's seeing this. He is sending messages back to Sturgis and the infantry saying, we need infantry up here. We're probably facing infantry. Whether it's infantry or not, there's still a lot of guys and they're showing fight. We can't sustain this. Please set up the infantry. The problem is because all those roads are totally mud from all the 9 or 10 days of rain before. It's taken a long time for the infantry because the cavalry was the first one. The Federal cavalry was the first one to the Crossroads. Union infantry is a few miles back. It's taken a while. They got a corduroy roads. They're doing things like this. It's a very, very difficult situation. So they start getting this, and so they start running these guys, through the Mississippi heat and the humidity to get to the Crossroads, right? To relieve the Federal cavalry. And the Federal cavalry has further tactical advantages in forms of their weaponry. A lot of the Federal cavalry have repeating rifles, but because that they're determined to kind of stay on their heels and the low visibility of the terrain, the Federal cavalry is burning through ammunition, burning through it, right? And so a tactical plus at the beginning of the day now becomes a tactical negative because now they're not only are they worried about who they're facing, they're worried about running ammunition because they've just been throwing so much lead out into that scrub oak every time these Confederates would attack, right? So slowly that Federal line is moving back. We're only about a quarter of a mile, about 0.3 of a mile from the Crossroads at the point. It's not a huge battlefield, right? It's something where it's a very digestible fight when you kind of learn how it develops and all that. And so they're pushing. So finally, the Sturgis arrives on the field, right? Sturgis had been riding with the infantry, right? And he can see that it's in a bad spot. Waring's brigade, that was the first Federal cavalry brigade that had started the fight, they are starting to break, right? They're starting to break. In fact, there's gaps in the line. 19th Pennsylvania Cavalry, which is serving as Sturgis's escort, has to go in and plug that line because they're so worried things are going to fall apart. And so when he arrives there, Sturgis actually doesn't do too bad when he's there at the Crossroads. He's directing, he's getting the cannon, the guns, he's starting to get them to fire. He's starting to see everything that's going on with this. But Forrest has a plan, and he's executing his plan, and he has the initiative, and he's the aggressor. Everything is going in the way already. And I should point out that the real firing starts around 9:30 in the morning, okay? So now we're talking about 12:30. All right, so it's been 3 hours of this just these demonstrations, these hard pushes, and then they will retreat back. And the reason why he's doing that is that Forrest can't go on a full attack because he doesn't have his full men. He's got a 700-man brigade, an 800-man brigade, and a 500-man brigade. He's waiting for that 2,500-man brigade to come in before he does anything. And so when we talk about fixing in place, this is why it's so critical in these early stages of this battle because if the Federal cavalry would have shown fight and showed aggression kind of like Forrest did, like I said, we'd be just talking about like the skirmish of Baldwin Road, and that would have been it, and that would have been the story of this. But it doesn't. So what ends up going on is the Federal infantry is now ordered to run to the Crossroads, and the last mile is uphill. There are reports of several men not only just falling out but dying of heat stroke. It's so bad, right? They get to these infantry, the 1st Brigade, and it's called the Illinois Brigade because it's all Illinois infantry units at this point. They get there and they start kind of filling in the gaps, and the cavalry starts pulling out. Almost all of them will pull out and leave the battlefield totally. Not all of them, but most of them will, which again is another problem because they should have kind of just resupplied and got back into the fight, but that's not what happened. So what ends up happening is these Illinois guys are so out of breath, they're so sunstruck that their fingers are clamped. They can't even pull their ramrods out of their rifles to start shooting.
Wow.
So they're there just kind of trying to catch their breath to get back into it. And so it's a very desperate scene. But at the same time, Forrest isn't running them over. And this is kind of one of the things about Brice's Crossroads that you kind of got to bring it back, because what people know about Brice's Crossroads is that it is this complete total Confederate victory. Forrest was outnumbered, and then he just kind of ran over the Union. And that's not the case. He's taking his time. He's actually showing really good tactical control and temperament at this point, right? He's showing patience, right? He's not. He is sending these kind of these demonstrations forward and doing all that, but he's not overcommitting before he has his forces consolidated. His artillery isn't even on the field yet. All artillery at this point is just on the Union side. Finally, Morton shows up, and right behind them is the big brigade of Tyree Bell's Tennesseans. Also at this point, Forrest has a second in command, really, really interesting guy named Abraham Buford, Kentuckian. He is West Point class of 1841. Forrest is always kind of presented as the antithesis of the West Pointer, but the truth is that if this is Forrest's grandest victory, which I think everyone will agree that it is, he did so with two West Pointers that were really, really kind of helping him out today. The leader of the Kentucky Brigade is Highland Lyon, a West Point class of 1856, a very, very hard-fighting man that serves in several capacities for the Confederacy in the Western Theater, wherever they can fit him in there. He's given charge of the brigade just days before Brice's Crossroads, and there couldn't have been a better pick as far as someone that's going to be able to assess the situation and give Forrest good feedback. And someone Forrest kind of instinctively trusts, which is strange for Forrest, right? It's probably because of the youth in the other ways, and then the other brigadier, so he's just a colonel, Harold Highland, but the Brigadier General Abraham Buford is also a Kentuckian.
Any relation to John Buford?
He is his cousin.
Okay.
Yeah,
I figured.
exactly. Yeah, and he's a Mexican War veteran. He is determined to sit out the war when the war starts. He doesn't want to do any part of it. As you can imagine, probably there's a lot of people in Kentucky that see themselves in that kind of way, right? Like I said, Kentucky plays big at the Battle of Brice's Crossroads, not with just the brigade, but also with Lyon and Buford, the leadership there on the Confederate side. And but his hand is forced when Bragg and Kirby Smith invade the state in 1862. He has to kind of choose a side, so he kind of reluctantly chooses the Confederate side because he's a West Pointer. He's able to get ranked pretty soon. He has a brigade at Champion Hill, and now he's been under Forrest at this point for a little bit. So that's Abraham Buford. Buford is a Mexican War veteran. He, in effect, has the right of the Confederates at Brice's Crossroads. Forrest is very active this day, very active. He is riding his horse from the furthest south of his line to the furthest north on several occasions, directing to make sure people know what he wants to do. When Buford and the artillery shows up, he's a little bit more confident that, like, hey, I'm going to allow these guys to kind of do their thing because he kind of has trust in them, right? At that point, Buford attaches one of the Tennessee regiments, the 2nd Tennessee Regiment, which is led by Clark Bartow. Again, I know I'm going to say this. Clark Bartow is another fascinating guy. He's actually Ohioan. There's this strange thing. Someone probably has written an article about it, or something. I think he goes to a college called Ohio Wesleyan, which is around Columbus, and 4 or 5 of those guys from about a 7-year period become high-ranking Confederate officers from Ohio. Like, what's his name? Otho Stahl from Franklin, one of the generals that's killed at Franklin. He's another Ohio Wesleyan guy. So I don't know what they were doing behind the scenes there, but some of them were very, very pro-South, and they moved, post college to South. And not only that, they become high-ranking officers in the Confederacy. Clark Bartow is one of those guys. Buford detaches them and says, hey, we want you to find a road around. Just like Forrest detached part of the Kentucky unit to find a road around the south, around the left, Buford and Forrest, they direct Clark Bartow's 2nd Tennesseans to go and find to the north and to the right to see if there's a way around to get behind this Union force. So all this is going on. Tyree Bell's Tennesseans get into the fight. They fully deploy just as the Union infantry is coming up in full. So now we have a full-on traditional Civil War battle going on at Brice's Crossroads, right? Now it's like Now, even though it's the dismounted cavalry on Forrest's side, but you have your lines of battle, you have your skirmish lines, you have it all going on, right? You have everything that you want to see. Artillery is now barking. It's going on both sides. But again, artillery, in a lot of reasons, because of the terrain, is not the story about Brice's Crossroads. Even though there's over 30 guns there, or at least 30 guns, they're not able to deploy because the visibility is low. You know what I mean? And so, but it will play a big role here in a second. So what ends up happening is you got Morton finally with the artillery barking. You have these full on battle lines going on, and the Union infantry that shows up isn't just run over. Like, these guys are veterans. These guys, every single one of these Union infantries, the white ones, and we're going to get to the black ones in a second, but the white ones, every single one of them has been on campaign. A lot of them have multiple battle honors. These are not people that are just going to be run over. Again, like, I know there is a bit of a mythos or a bit of the Western troops are made of a different brand. All these guys are Western troops. Interesting group that's out there is the 9th Minnesota. They're part of the 2nd Brigade to come up, which is actually part of the 1st Brigade in the order of battle, but 2nd Brigade to come up. The 9th Minnesota, they had never been together as a full regiment until maybe a week before, when they stepped off the boat in Memphis. What had happened to them is they're formed at Fort Snelling, Minnesota in 1862, and almost immediately the Sioux Uprising happens. And so they're sent to different outposts within Minnesota. They thought they were going to go out and fight Johnny Reb, and now they're on their own frontier fighting the Sioux Indians. Very famously, members of the 9th Minnesota will be part of that kind of square that forms around the largest the largest execution in American history, when I think there's 38 Sioux warriors that are hung. And so the 9th Minnesota they're part of that, right? And then they go down to Missouri, and they're all detached. So they finally come together as a regiment for the first time as they're stepping off the boat to Memphis. It's raining. It's in Mississippi, and now they're expected to run in the Crossroads. Like, this is so it's and they had experienced some combat on the frontier, but this was going to be a very different situation. That being said, they perform pretty marvelously, and it's really one of those things that gets lost into it because it is a Confederate victory. People kind of well, there must have been so and so, but the Union troops themselves fight very, very well. It's their kind of leadership that lets them down at the battle. And so you have these brigades are fighting. Sturgis at this point now removes himself from the Crossroads, and he kind of slowly starts moving his way back further north to where everything's a little quieter. Right now, he might be doing that for to make sure the USCT brigade, which is Boughton's brigade, is taking up a defensive position. Or he might just be trying to get out of there. I don't know, right? So there is some claims at this point that Sturgis is drinking again on the job, right? And so this is all going on. So now you have this tremendous fight that's happening at the Crossroads. Forrest troops are fully deployed. He's got every man that he's going to get that's on the field, and that's when he rides for the whole length of the line. And he goes, let's do a full-on attack. This one is now going to be for real. This is not a demonstration. This is not a probe. We're not looking to exploit. Like, we are now looking to overrun this line if we can do it. And he does that. And at the same time, those smaller units that he had sent to the flanks, right? Now, the one on the right flank, you have the whole regiment of the 2nd Tennessee. The one on the left flank, on the southern flank, I should say, which was made up of just 2 companies of the 12th Kentucky, has now grown. It has grown to a company of Gartrell's Georgians, which is a cavalry company, and it has also grown to Force Escort. Now, Force Escort is a very famed kind of fighting group out there in the Western Theater. These are hand-picked men, usually 80 to 120 of them that there are. These are all proven fighters. They're not an escort in the terms of like how it would normally be used, where it's just kind of someone to be around the ranking general and to maybe run errands or messages and stuff like that. The reason why Forrest has this as his escort is that he keeps them close by. When in any fight that he's at, he can personally deploy them into where the fight's the thickest or where things need to happen. So now his escort is part of this flanking party. So as this big push happens, right? As this big push happens, the Union line starts hearing this firing behind them. And they know that this double envelopment, right? Where you have your both ends of your line are getting overrun at the same moment is about to happen, right? And so you have all this going on.
Are those troops moving out to the left, like Forrest escorts? Were they sent out there by Forrest and they all just kind of met at different times and then they got together, or did they pick them up along the way?
So So yeah, they're not all at once, right? So you got the 12th Kentucky First. It keeps growing, and Forrest keeps growing the battlefield. I guess is the best way to put it. Is like he's looking to exploit on the end, like hit him on the end is one of the things that Forrest would always say, right?
You don't have to fight in a box.
You don't have to fight. Like let's keep on probing to where this is, right? Either for our own intelligence or to exploit a weakness. And as you know, in terms of Civil War tactics, everyone's always trying to outflank. Like that's what everyone's always trying to outflank you. That's where you can do the most damage on someone. So he's doing this on both sides, right? And so you have this all happening. Stanley Buckles, he's written a great regimental history about the 114th Illinois, and he's a part of the foundation. Really great guy. And he writes, he writes about how the 114th, even though they're not part of that full Illinois brigade, they get in line with these other Illinoisans. It just happens to be that the last inner guts of the Union line at Brice's Crossroads, they're all Illinois troops, even though you got Indiana and Minnesota and Ohio on the flanks.
Iowans are there, right?
Iowans are there, and the cavalry, and they'll play big here in a second. And what ends up happening is that the 114th, it's just to give you an idea about how dense the smoke and the thicket was, is that there were times that the 114th Illinois, they can't see the 81st Illinois, which is really supposed to be only 20 yards to their left, right?
And if it's humid like that too, the smoke's going to hang low.
Yeah, and when you come to Brice's Crossroads, you'll see, because now a lot of that is cleared. There's more fields and more open space, which makes it easier for interpretation and programming, which I'm thankful for. But at the same time, you get a sense of like, okay, there's some rolling hills, like where you can go out and you could find yourself, you could hide entire companies or regiments in these little gullies. And
which also had scrub oak on top of them. So, yeah.
Absolutely,
That's
right.
nuts. I was wondering how the terrain would play a factor, because it's different than other, like everyone hears about Antietam and Gettysburg and blah. But out west, you don't talk about it much. I mean, we hit on it with Chickasaw Bayou, but I was wondering here how it was going to play an effect in this kind of, you had these pockets of development in northeast Mississippi, but you have vast wilderness pretty much in a way in between.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Mobile, Ohio Railroad doesn't go through there until 1860, right? And so this is a very, very country part of Mississippi, right? At this point, this is very, very, in some ways it's still very country, but yeah, no, those are all good points. And so you have this starting to break. There's this great fight on Log Cabin Knoll, which is just north of the Crossroads. And like I said, Colonel Jim Garrett has written a great article on our website about that, because it's a little known fight, but this is where the Iowans come into play. The Iowans and Ohioans, they come into play, and they really kind of stem this tide. And this will be a reoccurring theme, right? Because when we come to the end of this and you see the casualty list, especially like the missing and captured, you just assume that this is just like this route that happens from the get-go, and it's not like, if it's not for some of these rearguard actions, it could be 10 times worse, right? So that's what's going on. So now the Crossroads is being overrun. Confederates are now taking the Crossroads. Morton, from the Confederate artilleryman, pulls his guns into the Crossroads. Now he's got a good field of fire. He sets up there. They take over some Union guns that were left around. They could not get them out, and they start shelling. They start shelling the retreating Union troops. There's a delaying action, especially by the 4th Iowa Cavalry that's there on the Log Cabin Ridge, but they also part of the USCTs there, and also is an Ohio regiment, infantry regiment, the 72nd Ohio. So they hold it a little bit, but now everything's going to pieces. There is a small little bridge that goes across Tishomingo Creek, which is the only way to get across this. And there's been 9 days of rain. Tishomingo Creek is not the Mississippi River, but with 9 days of rain anywhere, it's going to swell to a point where like you got to get across the bridge, you know? And so what ends up happening is that entire wagon train, not the entire wagon train, but that wagon train that was following the army, while all this fighting is going on, someone decided, completely not decided, someone decides to go from the safe side of the Tishomingo Bridge and start bringing those wagons to where the battle is happening on the Tishomingo Bridge, right? And we don't know whose order it was. We don't know. No one ever takes credit for it. Why would you? Because this becomes a huge, huge problem. It could be that you know, in just fashion, it was kind of in old army fashion, just follow the leader. The other guy was going to cross the bridge, so I did. But there's an interesting thing here, and that's Grierson sees this happening. And now, like I said, I consider Grierson second in command of this entire expedition. And he writes in his report, trying to kind of condemn Sturgis for it at this point, which it should be. But he writes, he goes, I see these wagons going across the bridge, but under whose orders I know not. But he doesn't do anything to stop it. And I really just want to highlight that why Benjamin Grierson is an unbelievable cavalry raider, and he will redeem himself as well. He really has a bad go of it here at Brice's Crossroads. Ed Bars, you know, the great Ed Bars, he maybe goes a little bit too far with it, ungenerously calls him a good raider, but not a great fighter, right? But I think there's part of it, you know, kind of like Longstreet at Gettysburg, where his input was no longer wanted from Robert E. Lee, who was going to do what he wanted, that he kind of just sulked a little bit. I think that's what you get from Grierson at Brice's Crossroads. I think that he tried to warn him, and now everything he said was, so like he was just kind of doing the minimum that day, which is a shame. But anyways, what ends up happening is now Morton turns his guns on that bridge. Everyone's trying to get through that bridge. Even the wagons that have made it across the bridge are trying to get across this little bridge. They're overturned, so now there's only like 4 feet of space, and so Morton is really raining down death and destruction from the crossroads on this spot, and it's real chaos for the Union. Now the chaos really starts to kick in, but an important thing happens, is that right across on the northern side of the bridge is that you have this USCT brigade. Okay, it's a brigade of about 1,300 USCT troops. Very famously, Sherman didn't really want any USCT troops in his army during the Atlanta campaign. So this will be the most significant action that black troops see at the battle during the Atlanta campaign, in my opinion, because I consider all this part of the Atlanta campaign. There's 1,300 of them, and they set up a fighting line at Holland Ridge. At Holland Ridge, you have the 59th USCT, the 55th USCT, and you have a section of 2 guns of the 2nd United States Colored Light Artillery, I believe Company F. So they're up there and they're waiting. They're going to be kind of like this line of defense that can stem anything. Now remember, at this point, the battle had started really at 9:30 a.m. What is going on now is we're at like 4:30, 4 o'clock. So this has been an all-day fight. This has been going on for a long, long time. And so what ends up happening is that those horse holders on the Confederate sides who had been kind of waiting, once the Confederates have secured Tishomingo Creek, they kind of switch them out. And if you would count up the numbers, which I've done being, you know, Brice's Crossroads geek, Forrest is really getting almost a fresh brigade, right? And it's not like all those guys are coming back, just enough to keep the horses back. So he's getting a fresh brigade up there. So these USCT troops, this is their first action that they've ever seen, right? A lot of them are semi-local. They were on plantations in North Mississippi and West Tennessee. Their leadership, particularly with the 59th, but I don't want to say for the other ones, only because I haven't done like deep research. I've done deep research in the 59th. Their officers are excellent. almost to a man. They are veterans of the Battle of Shiloh plus other places, so these guys know what they're doing. These aren't political appointees or anything like that. And Bowden, who is in charge of the USCT brigade, he is ready to kind of make a stand there. Sturgis tells them what's going on. It's all going to hell up at the Crossroads. So it's kind of up to you. McMillan, who's now he's the infantry division leader of the Union expedition, he comes back and says the same thing. He says it's kind of up to you guys now. And so when the Confederates are getting this second wind and influx of new guys, they are facing absolutely fresh troops too. That they did have to run a little bit, but not like those other ones, and they didn't have to run the mile. So now you have at this point almost a new battle with fresh troops. That's kind of like that's engaged right here, right when the route is about to take on its biggest turn, and it doesn't happen at that point because this USCT brigade, they dig their heels in and they fight extremely well. At this point, there is tons of fighting going on. After 30 minutes, the USCT brigade realizes that they can't hold either. They're about to be flanked on both sides. So they pull out, and there's a fighting retreat for over a mile until they finally get to a place called White House Ridge. And there again, there is another major fighting. Most of the Confederate battlefield casualties happen in these two rearguard actions right here during the battle. The USCT will suffer the most casualties percentage-wise of any of the infantry brigades, and it's because the intensity of the fight right here. And also, whenever you're talking about casualties in the Civil War battle, most of the casualties almost always, I shouldn't say this, if there is a retreat, if there is a rout, if there is a fighting thing, a lot of the highest percentage of casualties are going to come during that action, right? It's not when you're kind of standing toe to toe and fighting each other. Usually you can do it's once one side starts to slip, and then that's when the casualties start mounting, and that's what you start seeing happening here. Not to say that there weren't white regiments that at the same time were part of the rearguard action. There were certainly the Iowa Cavalry, the 114th Illinois, who we talked about before, and the 9th Minnesota, who we talked about before. They're all taking part of this as well. So it's not just the USCT, but the USCT is really going above and beyond any of the expectations, because Sturgis just wanted the USCT to guard the wagon train. Had no real intentions of fighting them, and now that they're facing a Confederate troop that had just broken two brigades of Federal cavalry and 2 brigades of Federal infantry, not regulars, but the white troops. Now here they're up, and they are showing their mettle and their ability, and it really goes to a lot of the training that that a lot of the white officers had put these USCT troops through for a number of months. Right? They did not look at their, even though they were given like fatigue party, they had to build barracks in Memphis. They had to do mundane stuff. The officership always expected that they were going to be in combat, and they made the men train and think like that, and that shows in this part of the battle, at Battle of Brice's Crossroads. So anyways, the Confederates keep on pushing, even though the USCT does as much as they can. Those lines are overrun, and eventually the full-on retreat, start all the way to Memphis, happens. It had taken them, and Forrest relentlessly pursues them. He's switching men out here and there. One of the more famous incidents that happens on the White House Ridge thing is that John Morton, we talked about his artillery is now finally really barking. They do a artillery charge, which is very kind of not the norm in Civil War terms, right? And they do it by hand, and most of it's uphill, and they almost get their guns taken for that. And Forrest, when Morton asked Forrest, did he hear that order right? Forrest tells Morton, he's like, guns are meant to be taken. So he's like, but it's worth more if you can kind of blow a hole in them than you can. So he moves the guns up unsupported in front of them, and so the USCT brigade takes devastating kind of canister blows from Morton's artillery, which kind of pull back the line a little bit. And so then you go on. And so why it took them 10 days to get from Memphis to Brice's Crossroads, it takes them 2 days to get back to Memphis because they're on the run. And those are the ones that make it back. A lot of them do not make it back. When we talk about casualties at the Battle of Brice's Crossroads, on the Confederate side, you have 96 killed outright, 396 wounded. I think those numbers are a little low. Our research into the Alabama Brigade kind of already proves that those numbers are a little low because there's been standard numbers that were given for them. Then when you actually go through the roster, you see there's a lot more guys that were there. On the United States side, you had 223 killed. So you have 320 men killed outright in this fighting, and they have 503 wounded, which gives you, your battlefield casualties alone between 1,200 and 1,300 casualties. So it's a substantial fight, right? There's probably about 12,000 men engaged total when it's all said and done, even though they're not all engaged at the same time, right? It's very much a phased battle as we went, like the cavalry, Union cavalry, versus the first couple brigades of Forrest, to Union infantry versus all the brigades of Forrest, to the USCT versus the refreshed guys of Forrest. So that at no point are all those men engaged, but about 12,000 to 13,000 men are engaged. So it's not a tiny, tiny battle by any means, but neither is it, Gettysburg. Or we're not trying to make it be Gettysburg. So that's what you got going on. But here's the big number, right? Is that you have 1,800 Union troops are missing or captured, right? So this is an enormous number, right? And it would be devastating at any other part of the probably in the early part of the war, this would have been considered just a phenomenal disaster, right?
Now, were the majority of these captures at the creek when they were trying to cross the bridge, or was this just along the retreat route, or a little bit of both? Good
question. Actually, most of the captures don't happen at the bridge. It's post-bridge. It's even post the USCT two major stands, which were at Holland Ridge and White House Ridge. It's beyond that because
just the race back to Memphis.
When I say they get back in 2 days, they didn't get back in 2 days by staying in column of fours and marching on the road. A lot of it was every man for themselves, right? And so when you were going in groups and stuff like that, and the Confederates were relentlessly pursuing you, they were just getting gobbled up, here and there, just huge handfuls of them. A lot of these guys would end up at Andersonville, right? And so there's that's another tie to our battle and all that. So, I've talked for a long time. Why don't you guys ask me some questions to get something out of me, because I feel like I just keep going and going and going.
So what's in the larger picture? Mm-hmm. What's, in your opinion, the greatest impact that this battle has? And then its immediate outcome, what's the response? But then in a larger picture, when you go to the 50,000-foot view, personally as a historian, where can you see the ripple effects of Brice's Crossroads?
All right. So here's, and I'm not breaking any news here. So, but here's the thing.
It has been 160 plus years. So.
Yeah.
Here's the thing: is that Sturgis is defeated. He will be shelled for the rest of the war. Right. He will not get another command again. For the rest of the war because of this. But he's a West Pointer, so he's a little bit protected. There is an official investigation, but there's no action is taken. But he kind of did his job, believe it or not, right? It's that he went out there, and because he went out there, Forrest was not able to make that raid on the Sherman's Railroad, right? On his supply line. So in that effect, he did what he was told. Now it was an embarrassing fashion. Sherman wasn't happy about it, right? In fact, when he gets initial reports, he assumes that, Sturgis says, we were outnumbered 2-1, even though he was actually outnumbered them 2-1 almost. And it's not until he reads captured Southern papers in Atlanta when they're kind of goading that hey, this small force just whipped this Yankee expedition. That he realizes that. So the big picture thing is that yes, this is a Confederate battlefield victory. They are very rare of note in the Western Theater. I mean, you can really count them on one hand if you want to. I mean, you have Richmond, Kentucky in 62. You have Chickasaw Bayou, late 62. You have Chickamauga, famously huge victory, but it's unexploited and not looked after. And then you have the disaster Chattanooga after that. And you got Brice's Crossroads. As far as you're talking about, thousands of troops engaged and all that, there's not many victories. So it is a Confederate victory, but it's mission accomplished for Sherman because Forrest does not get on that railroad. So that's kind of the big, that's the most important thing. But also Sherman isn't satisfied from that. He will send out a 15,000 man expedition just a few weeks later. This is relentless, and this kind of shows you where we're at in the war, right? But before I do that, let me read you this quote about. We talked about the rebel revival, the article that was in the Civil War Monitor, and all that, and to give you an idea. And this is always fascinating to me because when I still get kind of stuck in the Civil War world where it's like it took days or weeks to weeks to figure out what's going on. It kind of shows you how fast news would move at that time. So this is a quote from Robert E. Lee, no less, and this is on June 14th. This is on June 14th. So the battle happens on June 10th. June 11th, Forrest is still pursuing him. So they're like, he might be sending back word to Lee, to Stephen D. Lee, who's down in Okolona, being like, hey, we've won the battle, but they don't really know what's going on. Like this. So on June 14th, Robert E. Lee sends this to Jefferson Davis, saying the victories of Forrest and Hampton are very grateful this time and show that we are not forsaken by a gracious providence. We have only to do our whole duty and everything will be well. So it shows you that not only was it already brought up to Richmond, but then it had already been forwarded to Robert E. Lee that like Forrest had done something of note in North Mississippi. But it shows you that the Confederate attitude was like the war certainly isn't over at this point. There's still a lot to be fighting for and everything like that. But as we saw, it was mission accomplished. So this other expedition goes out. This other Union expedition is A.J. Whiskey Smith. That would lead to the Battle of Tupelo-Harrisburg, which is a Confederate defeat. The Confederates cannot replace their men, and the Union armies just keep getting bigger. So the first expedition was 6,000 men. Brice's Crossroads, 8,500 men. Tupelo, 14,500 men. And then August, because Sherman wasn't happy with what happened in Tupelo, even though it's a federal victory, he sends out a 20,000 man expedition. So these are all coming, like they keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, which one, it shows you the importance that Sherman is putting on making sure that they stamp out anything that's going on out there that gives any ability that Forrest to cause him harm is completely gone. But it also shows you that for every man that the Confederacy is losing at this point, the Union is being able to replace 3 to 4 of them. I mean, it's just, so it's really showing that, that kind of point where we're at in the war.
Yeah.
Cool.
Any questions, Cindy?
No questions, but what I would like to say is how Graham and I got connected.
Yes.
I follow particular characters during the war, and my kids and I started out with Joshua Chamberlain at Gettysburg. I got into Confederate cavalry officers, and I did Mosby and Stewart, and then somehow I got on to Nathan Bedford Forrest. And next thing I know, I'm down at Brice's Crossroad, and this is how Graham and I got connected. And the Confederate officers are very colorful and interesting reading. If you get the chance to go down to Brice's Crossroads, I've been there 3 times. Go down and then re-listen to this podcast, and you can see it.
I bet it was good for you because you've heard this, I'm sure, before.
The full experience.
I got to camp on the battlefield.
Yeah.
I feel like I got a little too technical there. I was hoping for you guys to jump in, but like I said, when I get going, I get going.
Oh, no,
I can't stop.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
It was fun.
Well, then,
I loved it.
During this episode, I was like, okay, I need to get down there like soon. 'cause
You need to
I
get
need to
down
see this
there.
landscape. I need to see that.
Well, so let me tell you a little bit of what we're doing there.
yeah,
right?
talk about the foundation.
yes.
Yeah, because I mean, you guys kind of set me up like, really, since a kid, I've been watching what's been going on here in the Shenandoah Valley, and I'm just amazed. You know what I think of the organization, Jack? You know what I think of Kevin? I think Kevin is unbelievable guy, right? Totally impressive guy. And it really is, it is the blueprint for private battlefields to follow, right? At Brice's Crossroads, we have this unbelievable opportunity that's kind of presented to ourselves here, where we have 2,000 acres. Most of the core of Battlefield is already kind of bought and paid for, and it's quote unquote preserved. But I do kind of live by a mantra, and that I've passed this down through the foundation, that preservation without interpretation is kind of meaningless in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm very glad that a Dollar General won't be built out there, but if it's still just a field, it's still a field. You know what I mean? And so you need to kind of put meaning on it. And so we've been trying to do that, like I said, with our monthly Battlefield programming, which has been received really, really well. Just enthusiasts out there going out there. And one thing I should mention about the foundation is that we're a totally volunteer organization. So every dime that we get either goes to programming or membership events or doing things on the battlefield. And so it really is just kind of a labor of love. You know, it's not, this is something that, you know, you got really good people. Like Cindy has been incredible. Like Cindy is the exact kind of person that we try to kind of, you know, bring on, because here's somebody that lives a quarter of the country, a third of the country away, but kind of sees what we're doing and is so nice about it, you know, and
buys into it.
And that tells me that we're doing things right. And I've told Cindy this before, so she's not hearing anything new there. But so we finally have some projects going on out there that we're really excited about. I told you about how the guts of that battlefield in the last Union line outside the Crossroads was all Union. So we have started an Illinois Arc kind of memorial trail. And what we've had is that we've had we've had some really generous donors from Illinois that have wanted to put up monuments to those Illinois units. And so instead of just kind of putting them around wherever, we decided to kind of recreate that arc that comes around. And if you see the American Battlefield Trust map of Brice's Crossroads, you'll see that arc right away. And so we have, that's the first kind of trail system that's going to connect parts of the battlefield, you know, that's been done in 20 years down there. We face a lot of challenges, like I said, because we don't have any kind of state or federal funding at this point or anything like that. It's really just enthusiasts that care about it. But also that gives us a great opportunity where it's like we don't have to go to people that don't care about the Civil War for permission. We can kind of paint this picture how we want. And so we rely on regional and national Civil War enthusiasts to help us out with that. We've had really great help from some big names in Mississippi, people like Parker Hills, General Parker Hills. If you've never heard from him, look up YouTube videos of Parker Hills. He is the expert. He is the guide of the Vicksburg campaign. I mean, not just the siege, but the campaign, like getting down in the guts of Mississippi. He's great. He's great about that. So that's kind of where I was. So we're doing that. We're trying to get artillery pieces out there. The only artillery pieces that are out there right now are on that 1 acre National Park Service site, and they're kind of ornamental. They're almost like the high water mark at Gettysburg, which you've never been to yet, but you know the high water mark, where it's like,
of course,
you
right. Can't miss it when you go to Gettysburg.
Right, yeah. It's a big battle. You should look into it.
Maybe one day.
I love this.
In fact, Brice's Crossroads is the Gettysburg of the West. No, it's not.
You could declare that here for everybody. You're the first one to do it.
No. I wish, but it's not. But
Can I interrupt and say my first event down at Brice's Crossroad, well, I went through really quick one time, and then the next time I did an illuminary event.
Oh, yeah.
If you ever get the opportunity to participate in that, that is awesome. Whether it's Antietam or Gettysburg, you just can't believe what you see.
Did you all put that on? The
we did, and that was one of these things where we learned very quickly that this won't be a yearly thing.
No kidding.
Because it was so awesome. I mean, it was poignant. It was great. It was done. but that costs a lot. It's a lot of labor, and the listeners can't hear that, but not as mean, definitely not as lean, but I guess still a U.S. Marine. But it was heck on my back bending over and putting all those down.
Oh yes.
But it was such a great event. We did that on the 160th anniversary. We try to think of unique things that will bring people out, that would catch the eye of not you're just Civil War geek like me, because I go to these battles. There's nothing I love more than a battlefield, and going out there. And that's why I'm so excited to go walk around 3rd Winchester, here, because that wasn't there when I was a kid, when I was visiting Winchester, and there's other things that people might not be, interested in. And when we thought about it, we're this is a great event. There's a time to do it. We're going to do it. So we're going to do another ones in the future. And we worked in conjunction with Cheryl at the Mississippi Final Stands Museum, and Cheryl's been very, very nice. And it was a great event. And Cindy really helped us. We needed volunteers for that very, very badly. But so we have our yearly membership weekend. We do that every June, as close as we can get to the anniversary. This year we'll be having Dan Masters. I don't know if you know who he is, but if you don't, you need to look into him. He is a prolific writer in terms of articles and books. He just put out a really, really great thing, a great book on Stones River. But he's written a lot of these articles on Brice's Crossroads. He's from Ohio. He's got a kind of specific look into Ohio. And that's one of the things that we try to do at the foundation, is that, most people think Brice's Crossroads is just Nathan Bedford Forrest. So that either attracts some people or that deters some people. But the truth is there's 12,000 combatants at the Battle of Brice's Crossroads, and 11,999 of them are not Nathan Bedford Forrest. And so when you start digging into these other stories, and that's not taking anything away. I mean, like I said, the tactical brilliance of Forrest at Brice's Crossroads is undeniable. So that is always going to be part of the story. But when you start looking at something like that, we got Ohio regiments, we got the Kentucky Brigade from the Confederate side, we got we got the USCT Brigade on the there's these stories that really can be dug into, and that has been the most rewarding, fun thing about being the foundation, is getting with other Civil War enthusiasts and putting on programs about these guys, doing research into them, and kind of putting that out there, and then getting feedback from the community at large.
Yeah. That's awesome. Elijah, did you have any questions?
No, I think everything was pretty good.
Yeah, no, this has been fantastic.
We all got to get to Mississippi.
Yeah.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, well, Cindy, thank you so much for bringing the bourbon today.
Let me just plug. So we have a website, which is
plug that.
Brice's Crossroads Foundation.com. I know that's a mouthful, but that's BRICESCROADSFOUNDATION.com. We also have a Facebook. We try to be very active with that. We have an Instagram. It's a little bit out of our expertise, but we're trying. We have a YouTube channel. We do have some good videos on there. But I'll tell you what, as an extremely grassroots organization, videos are hard. They are very hard to do. So we have a lot of things on there that you can watch, but we only update that, a couple times a year at this point, because it's difficult. But we have all that kind of stuff. Facebook is the easiest way. We have a website. We have original articles. But I really appreciate coming on. Let me just say one last thing, is that I'm so excited about this podcast, about you guys.
It's awesome.
Young guys that are young people that are into this is so important. It's one of the things that really gets me really, really excited. I didn't realize how young you were until you just told me here about an hour ago. And man, that's great. Really good on both of you. I really can't say enough good things about it. Just really, really excited for the future, and especially since you're connected to such a great organization here. So that's thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, thank you, Graham.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That means fantastic. A lot, and glad we get to give some love to your foundation and that part of the country that we're trying to. Obviously, it'd be easy for us to just do Valley topics, but we'd probably run out at some point. So we love to cover different things that we're not familiar with, have people that are subject matter experts come on, and we're just so honored to have you here. And I'm glad that you come out to the East Coast every so often to, explore this region and go back to your roots a little bit. And Cindy, thank you for bringing the bourbon for today, the James
You betcha,
Pepper.
and
Thank
I
you.
have
That was
another
really good.
suggestion when we're off air.
Okay. Yeah, and thank you for just being a great supporter, and thank
You guys are the best.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for listening. Don't forget to share this episode with your friends. Give it 5 stars, like it, do whatever you need to do. Elijah, is there anything I'm missing of that?
No, I think that's pretty good.
Yeah. So
Alrighty.
don't forget to like, share, comment, all those things, and
5 stars.
5 stars especially, and we'll catch you on the next one.